Hey everyone, welcome back to Dev Parkour. So one of the things that uh, was recommended to me a long time ago when uh, unfortunately I was working in a company that had recently had a data breach and all of the developers were going through secure coding training. That was my first real introduction to the process and the techniques of secure coding. There was a section on authentication, and the instructor said in no uncertain terms that you should never, ever, ever write your own authentication system. So, what have I done at pretty much every job that I've ever been at, except for the one I'm at right now? I've written an authentication system. And that's what we're going to do at some point in the near future. But before we do that, we need to go through few different concepts. Starting with today's video, where I'm going to give an overview on what I mean by authentication, and some of the things that we're going to be looking at over the next couple weeks, and some of the things that we're going to be building into our authentication system. Now, we're not going to build an authentication system totally from scratch, at least I don't think. I do have uh, a plugin, an authentication system that I've been using for a while. I actually built it off of something called User Pi, which at the time seemed like a good idea, but since I originally started using it, I've essentially rewritten the entire thing. So it doesn't look much like User Pi, except for a few lagging remnants. I think one of the tables is named User Pi something, but that's the only resemblance it bears to the original User Pi. It is a PHP library, but these concepts are not PHP specific. They will carry over to any other language that you're, of course, not writing an authentication system in. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the distinction between authentication and authorization. We are specifically going to be worrying about authentication, though the library or the package that I'm building does have some authorization concepts, but that's more because authorization has something to do with users, and this is the system that manages users. That's about the extent of authorization. The distinction is that authentication is determining who a user is, identity, and is a user a known user? Is the user able to provide some sort of credentials that indicate that they are in fact who they say they are? That is what authentication is concerned with. Am I Brian? That's it. Authorization, on the other hand, is, as Brian, do I have permissions, and what sort of permissions do I have to, say, record a YouTube video, upload a YouTube video, or in the case of the Glassminnow project that I've been working on for a while, do I have permissions to create a new order? Do I have permissions to edit an order? Do I have permissions to delete a customer? Do I have permissions to ship an order? Those sorts of things. It's more oriented around permissions, and once we know who you are, or even if you're an anonymous user, what are you allowed or not allowed to do? What are you authorized to do? Okay, so that's the first distinction to get out of the way. The second thing that I want to talk about is what all is involved in an authentication system. Most of us think super easy about login and registration. Those are the two main components that we think about. Obviously, you need a login form that someone can type a username and password into. You do some verification on the server. We'll get to that in a minute. And then they either are allowed or they are not allowed. Sorry, that's not the best way I could have said that. They're not identified, or they are identified, or they're not identified. And then there's registration, right? How do new users become new users? However, there's a lot more that goes into an authentication system that I know I typically forget about when I'm building out an authentication system the first time. In addition to being able to register, you typically want that to be some sort of two-step process. So you enter your information into the registration form, you get an email asking you to verify your account, and only when you click that verification link, is your account actually activated. The second thing is some sort of forgot password, which is you are not logged in, you are unable to log in. How do you reset your password? How do you, forgot password. And then change password. So this is, I am logged in, how do I set a new password? Those are the two that I usually forget, are the forgot password and the reset password. Some authentication systems have a way of looking up your username or something like that. I have mixed feelings about that. There is a particular vulnerability that is called user enumeration. So depending on how you coded your, you can even do this with a forgot password form, but depending on how you've coded your forgot username form, you can accidentally, inadvertently expose the usernames of valid users. Not because you tell the person at the form, hey, this is a valid username, but because the form behaves differently depending on whether there is a username connected to that email address or isn't a username connected to that email address. And that's, that's bad. The other thing is, I go back and forth on the idea of using usernames as email addresses, or using email addresses as usernames rather. At this point, there is some security to be gained by using a username as the authentication token, as the name that you use to log in, as opposed to your email address, because lots of people know your email address. Your email address is basically public. If you use your email address as your username, you're using something known as your username. People can very easily find your username, and then it's all up to the password to be secure. Whereas if you use a username, they not only have to know your email, well, they don't need to know your email address at all, but knowing your email address doesn't help them know anything about your account. They'd actually need to find your username, because there is some entropy there, right? You have made it up to be, in theory, something different from your email address, and they'd have to know your password or find it or extract it somehow. So maybe there is some security to be gained there, but it is definitely at the expense of ease of use. It's a lot easier to log into and remember how to get into a site that uses your email address as your username, rather than requires you to have a separate username. And that's where something like a forgot username field might actually be helpful. But those are basically kind of the high-level concepts that we're going to go through as we do this authentication implementation. Over the next couple videos, we are going to talk about some ways to do authentication with third-party services, so things like auth and that sort of thing, which, if you can do that, definitely recommend that. But there are some situations where you, for one reason or another, need to have a local database of users and credentials and stuff like that. We'll also talk about what makes a secure authentication token, and where you should and or should not store that, how to do that safely with web applications, and then we'll actually get into some implementation. So thanks for watching. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button, subscribe, click that notification bell. Leave a note down in the comments if you've done this before or have other ideas, or if there's anything specific you want me to answer in the upcoming videos. More than happy to. Again, thanks for watching, and I will see you tomorrow.